Good afternoon. Let us begin. Welcome to the Health and Human Services Budget Subcommittee. Today is our very first hearing. It's an informational hearing, and we'll be joined by one other member as we get started, and we'll take the roll at that time. I want to thank you all for being here. I want to thank the committee members for joining us for this special meeting. Our goal today is to set the tone for our conversations throughout this year. So today we're honored to be able to hear from partners in three key areas that we think will be discussed in high volume at Health and Human Services. In particular, we'll hear from representatives who serve those with developmental disabilities. We will hear from advocates in the child welfare area, and we'll hear from those in the health sector. We'll also hear from department leadership in each of those areas. And our framing conversation this afternoon will be, how do we address gaps and opportunities that we see in the areas of health and human services. We're going to have a few brief remarks from our great six panelists who will meet shortly. And after each panelist has gone about 3 to 4 minutes, we want you to speak for 3 to 4 minutes. We're going to give the committee members an opportunity to ask questions, and that's where we hope that the lion's share of our conversation will be, is in the question and answers period. Having said that, I'd like to get our work underway, and I'd like to give the members of our committee an opportunity if they wish to make any opening remarks. Seeing none, we will get underway, and we will call our panelists if they'd like to come forward, and then we'll do a quick introduction, and we'll get underway. There's a list of all of them. Yeah, so, here. Thank you. We've got a great group of panelists today. We will hear from Tony Anderson, who is the Executive Director of the ARC of California. We'll also hear from Santi Rogers, the Director of Department of Developmental Services. We'll then hear from, in health, Jennifer Kent, who is here. And we will have a representative from the California Endowment who will also participate, Dr. George Flores. And in the area of child welfare, we'll hear from Kyle Sporletter, who is a legislative coordinator for the California Youth Connection. And then we'll hear from Deputy Director Cervinka from the Department of Benefits and Services at DSS. Thank you. And with that, let us begin with Mr. Anderson.
Thank you. Right here. Can you hear me okay? Good. Thank you for this opportunity. I have a handout. Okay. Oh, that. Okay. Now I'll even talk less loudly. So, thank you, sir. Those are my prepared comments. If I said them all, it would take 1 hour. So I got it. 3 to 4 minutes. The challenge is on. Tony Anderson, thank you. You've already said where I'm from. I also represent United Cerebral Palsy and the Lanterman Coalition, which is a coalition of all the organizations that support people with developmental disabilities and their families in some way. So it's a very diverse membership group. It's 19 organizations. First thing I thought I would talk about, though, is the living conditions of our community before we get into the gaps, because I think it helps build a little more context for what's happening for people with developmental disabilities in California. So first of all, people with developmental disabilities themselves are living in poverty in California at a much higher rate than the general population. It's about double the rate of poverty. And actually, it would be even more if so many people didn't live at home with their families. You have adults in our system today. Most of the adults who would probably be living on their own are living with their family members. And many of them live at home for way into their lifespan. So if it weren't for the family members who are helping and doing so much that need support to do this, if it weren't for those family members, the rate would be even higher. And I remind you that it's double. The poverty rate is double. Good afternoon. People with developmental disabilities are also severely unemployed and underemployed. Only 13% of our population have jobs, and in their jobs they're making approximately $485 a month, and so you know how far that would go in California, and that's only 13% of our population. So it's those individuals are living, many of them are living at 100% of SSI, which is below the poverty line. And if you look at the housing for California, I know that's an important issue for many of you. It's a very important issue for us. Where would they live? So people with developmental disabilities, if they're living at 100% of SSI, there are no counties in California whose median cost is that at 100%. It's above, and it's around 120% of SSI. So there is no place in California that most of our people can afford to live. So I think that's a very important other factor in there. The families themselves also live in poverty in many instances. We have a higher rate of asset poverty than any other group. We also have a large rate of poverty for single mothers who are caring for a child or an adult at home with a developmental disability. And if you look at the divorce rate, unfortunately, in our community, it's very high. So you can tell that the single parenthood in our community is vast. It's likely, and so therefore that statistic is even more meaningful. The workers that work in our system are working for very low wages, and they're living in poverty as well. 46% of the individuals who are working in direct care, supporting people with developmental disabilities, are living in households where they receive public benefits. That's 46%. They're living in a state, like I said. You probably realize this, but California is the second highest cost of living in terms of housing in the country, second only to Hawaii. So it's a very difficult situation for folks that they're living in. So I wanted to give you a bit of that view. The other is that the turnover rate for people that are supporting people with developmental disabilities is extremely high. So it's anywhere from 50 to 70% turnover rate. And most of them are leaving within 6 months. So this is a very crazy situation that we're all trying to exist in and trying to receive supports. Those are just a few. Like I said, I've got a whole bunch of other comments for you that you could read into, but I want to get into the system gaps because I'm not sure how much time I got left, but I'm going to go as fast as I can. I'm sure he will give me extra time from his allotment. In 2009, we cut our early start services pretty bad. $35 million removed from the budget that was there to support infants and toddlers in California. We made thousands of children not eligible for services anymore. Now, we have since then, last year, made them eligible again, but getting the word out is going to be extremely difficult. But if you can imagine that this has been happening since 2009, that today our outcome reports to the feds in OSEP, the federal government education, are very low. And we're in our third year in a row on being closely watched by the federal government because we're not meeting the standards that we're supposed to meet for the infants and toddlers. And one of the most important areas of growth for a little baby is their social emotional development. That's not just them, but the family as well, and how they all bond together. And that we're doing terrible in. We're doing so bad in California that even our highest scoring regional center in this area is far below the national average. So we obviously we would be in trouble if you make these kinds of cuts over the years, and that's one indicator that's showing that we're in trouble and not standing by the babies in California that need extra help. The LAO report that just came out, I looked through there, and I think one thing that's really important to note is that they note that if you account for inflation, that today we're spending 10% less per person than we had in 2007. So accounting for inflation, it's 10% less money, and you know that the costs have gone up so much. The ARM rate that was developed in the 90s, the ARM rate is is a model based on at least 6 people in a home. That's for group homes. I forgot to mention that part. Live that so much, I forget that. But the ARM rate is for the group homes, and it was based on a certain model of providing services. And it's very old, and we don't even serve people. We serve 6 people in a home the way we used to back when it was developed. So services have all changed. There are a variety of other issues here. I'm feeling like how am I doing on time? So I know make sure I get it all.
You should thank Director Santee for ceding you his time.
Giving the extra time.
You've actually given us a lot to think of, and we will have some more discussion in the Q&A. So,
okay, can I at least give you my final closing thoughts? So, there are plenty of opportunities ahead of us. We see that the developmental centers is a model that we would not provide today. We would not build a new one today. It's just not what we do. We know that we're in the process of closing the developmental centers. There are many advocates, the LAO, a lot of other folks are talking about how to close them. We completely think that that's the way to go. There are some savings in there that we can have in the state, and then the money should be used to make the community system healthier. This community system has been under attack for so many years in terms of its divestment from the system that it shouldn't be a surprise to anybody that is in this much trouble, that it is frayed to this level. So when we say that we need a 10% increase in the system across the board just to stabilize it, it shouldn't be a surprise. It's not hyperbole. It's real, that there are real people out there hurting really bad, and they're living under those conditions that I mentioned earlier. And I appreciate your time, and I appreciate that we'll have many opportunities to talk throughout this session, and good luck to us all.
Thank you, Mr. Anderson. Director Rogers.
Yes. Good afternoon, Assemblymember Thurman and Assembly members. Really good to see you all and meet you. Mr. Thurman, it was great to speak on Thursday to give you a synopsis and my 3.5 minutes now, since my good buddy here. I have the honor and pleasure of working in the service system in many different roles for over 4.5 decades. What that teaches you that every year of those decades you're learning something completely new. I come from the San Joaquin Valley and have San Joaquin Valley values, and had great parents that volunteered me and my sister at a young age to introduce ourselves to fellow Californians. That's how we learned what we were going to do, and what became of it is a great act called the Lanterman Developmental Disability Services Act. I think you shared with me, Assemblymember Thurman, that it's really good to spend at least a couple minutes describing where you come from. Where you come from, and this act is one of the fabulous additions to a civil rights movement in the United States, transferring it to all citizens, including people with intellectual and developmental special needs. What it really required is a grassroots effort. As you just heard from the prior speaker, the associations that evolved from it were grassroots organizations made up of parents and family members, including individuals themselves, bringing forward the opportunity for a good life. The best way to explain that from a philosophical perspective, a good life is an opportunity to choose who you're going to socialize with, who you're going to be with, who you're going to live with, the opportunity to have your own place to live, and the opportunity to have access, listen closely usually, to good work, work that pays a minimum wage. What we have in this budget coming forward to us is the opportunities to do, I think, more of those elements in a demonstrative way. Right now, we're serving 280,000 individuals and growing throughout the 58 counties in California. We serve them through 21 regional centers by contract with the State Department of Developmental Services. Each one of those regional centers, by comparison to other states, would be the same size as a moderate state program, just one regional center. What that helps you put in perspective is the complexities, the diversity of all of the changes that happens, all of the states, including the great state of California. It has presented challenges. It's been presented challenges from, we just heard from the prior speaker, of how we had to adjust when we had economic turnarounds that were significant, that really caused us to have to downsize programs. In some cases, some of the programs left us. It was a sad, sad moment in the history of California, and those moments ran on for almost 5 years. As a regional center director before coming to this job, that region had Santa Clara, Monterey, Santa Cruz, and San Benito County. It was called San Andreas Regional Center. Just that area alone is a large demonstration of what I just shared with you. Culturally diverse, a mobile population, high pockets of more employment for some people, but not all of Californians in that geographic area, including Californians who happen to have an intellectual and developmental special need. That's kind of 10 feet above the ground. We have for you a nice fact book. We're reissuing the fact book. I think it'll be very helpful to you and your staff, as well as some outlines of information that, because of the time now, you'll be able to research. We'll have that to you and your staff before we're finished. I want to talk about one of the major initiatives that has already been mentioned a second ago as a resounding point that I'll speak to again, given the opportunity. The California Departments of Education and Developmental Services, with the urging of Disability Rights California, entered into an unprecedented agreement relative to encouraging real, competent, integrated employment. Competent, integrated, and competitive employment. I like both the C's, so I use them interchangeably. Please take note of that. It is really a milestone to have these three departments come together and work in a very short order to provide opportunities for real work at a competitive basis. That is one of the major markers that I decided today to share with you because of the difficulty, unseen to you maybe, of actually coming together, doing what appears to be, for the people of California, a relatively simple thing. Coming together and bringing three large organizations to do just that task. We know you will monitor us closely. I sure hope you do, because our ambition is really significant. The other issues that I want to bring to your attention really quickly is the overall governor's budget as it relates to increasing where people have the opportunity to live. In the governor's budget, we have expectations that we will develop more living arrangements than we have to date, and we will do that in a community-based effort. Obviously, the regional centers and other participants would be a cornerstone of that opportunity. Also, in the home and community-based waiver, which we're a participant of as we're meeting right now, a home and community-based waiver task group is meeting simultaneously, looking at ways that we can expand our participation in one of the most impressive programs for people with intellectual and special needs. The opportunity to actually have access to work. Access to everything I suggested already to you, which I believe to everyone in this room would be common, a good life. And I already explained that for you. I think one of the challenges of all challenges, and I'll be really brief on this, is the state-operated programs that you already heard mentioned just for a few minutes. Our state developmental centers and the three remaining state developmental centers, Lanterman had just closed in December. Our special treatment programs within that at Canyon Springs, which is a small special treatment service for folks with significant behavioral challenges. It's a small living arrangement, 24 hours, 365 days a year. Then there's Porterville Developmental Center that has a secured treatment. I know in briefing some of you that we've talked about that extensively. As you also know, that we're actually increasing the number of persons living there as part of this budget in order to address some of the significant issues we have from many of our large cities in California relative to people to be competent to stand trial in a process that leads to their competency. Those are challenging issues. We'll go in a lot of detail when we're in the committee hearing as well. So I want to just give you that little summary of topical issues. That's enough to keep everybody, seriously, really involved. We're optimistic. We're very optimistic with our team within the Department of Developmental Services, with our experience, a breadth of experience that helps us stay energized and focused. And so with that, I look forward to your questions.
Thank you, Director Rogers, and thank you, Mr. Anderson. I'll turn to the committee members if any committee members have questions for this very first panel. Mr. Chu.
Just start touching upon two areas that I have been thinking about in the last couple of years around the community folks that we are discussing today. First of all, I was very struck by the statistics around housing and the fact that no California county has a median rental rate under 100% of SSI. Is there an estimate of what level of funding would be required to be able to house the folks that we're talking about? We have housing challenges all over the city and all over the state, and affordable housing crises, frankly, up and down the state. But for communities of individuals with disabilities, has there been any attempt to quantify that?
Right. There's a very important study done by TAC, it's the Technical Assistance Center, and I can get you that study. And it really drills down to developmental disabilities and disabilities in general, and their ability to be in the community, and for states to comply with the homestead requirements. So I don't know the number exactly, or even if there is, but it would show in the different regions what has been done and what needs to be done in terms of increasing affordable and accessible housing for people with disabilities, because that's another very important piece of it. One, we can't afford it, but you also can't get in, and it doesn't matter either. So, but we do have those, and I will send that to your office, and I can send it to the committee as well.
Love to get that. And then my second follow-up, I know there have been many innovative programs around the state to help individuals with disabilities get into the job market, employment, skill, training. Have there been surveys of the best programs that are out there and what programs we ought to be considering supporting over others?
Yes, Assemblyman Chu. We'll supply you with some of the programs that are very encouraging relative to full employment. I was mentioning just a moment ago about the collaborative memo of understanding we have with disability rights, the Department of Education, Department of Rehab, and Department of Developmental Services to supercharge that outcome. And we're very encouraged by that, and we'll keep you really intimately involved. Across our different communities in California, many of the regional centers have sponsored, actually, startups for more employment for people, programs that are in more employment. Understand, as we move forward, you're going to hear more and more briefings relative to how the federal government evaluates what competitive employment and employment really looks like. And we will get back to you on that as well. You have a lot of things we're promising we're going to give to you, but be encouraged by that, because the federal government has been really looking at, and I think that's maybe a base to your question, of meaningful work that meets the criteria for all of us as workers, that you can actually have a sustainable salary, that you can actually have a good place to live, access to a good place to live. And that's some of the areas of keen interest relative to the federal government, as we offer our plans of how to accomplish that. So it's encouraging, but we still have 70% of our clientele, just another piece of data, live in their natural homes. 70% of the people we serve live in their natural homes with family members or some other relative. So that's an important data to keep asking us how we're doing relative to that, because they live together.
Thank you.
Can I quickly, just real quickly, a few years ago, we have a program called Supported Employment, and it's one of our most integrated and higher wage kind of programs that we have. And in California, we cut that program by 10% in 2008, and we still have not put the money back into that program. And so that's another one of the barriers that we have to moving forward. Organizations aren't able to provide that the way they used to.
Great. Thank you, and look forward to getting that information from you.
Thank you. I want to acknowledge the presence of our leader on budget, Dr. Weber, who is a former chair of this committee and is certainly leading us and is certainly a friend to the area of Health and Human Services. Just want to acknowledge and welcome Dr. Weber to our committee. Ms. Groves, you had some questions.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I guess I have a couple of questions for Mr. Rogers and Mr. Anderson, both. So, Mr. Rogers, I am very greatly encouraged by your comments and your remarks, but I do have concerns relating to the closure of the developmental centers. As these assets are closed, these assets, how do they accumulate to benefit the community? For example, there's $500 million, $500 million, actually, in this year's budget, next year's budget to serve just about 1,000 people that are still inside the DCs. And the properties themselves that these people live in are worth, I don't know, I'm not an appraiser, but I would assume $500,000 to $700 million. It's substantial. There's also customized wheelchairs, like Bob's wheelchair that's in the middle of the aisle back here that probably is a $50,000 wheelchair. So I guess when these facilities close and you have these wheelchairs and these special beds and the things that cater and make life easier for these consumers, one of the questions that I have is, why aren't they translated to the community? When they leave the DC centers, they're basically, give me your wheelchair, give me your bed, give me all your stuff, and then you go to the community. The community's responsible, and the community's responsible for providing this stuff for you. It creates a delay for the people. They don't have the stuff right away, and it just sits there in the DCs, especially with the reduction in the people that are being held in the DCs. So I guess my question is that what's your thought process on allowing the community to either purchase or give it? I know it belongs to the state of California, but truly these individuals in these DCs are, I don't want to say wards of the state, but they truly are the state has to assume the responsibility, and they rightfully should assume the responsibility. And it doesn't matter if they're in the DC or in the community. Why can't it be assigned to them as it's Bob's wheelchair? If he leaves the DC, it should follow him to the community. It's Bob's bed, and it should leave him and follow the community. How do we bring these assets in these closures to the community at a low cost or free even to transfer over and not have the community or the taxpayer repurchased items?
Great question, but you probably heard that from a person who's trying to answer the question. The significant part of any movement out of a state developmental center is an individual plan. I participate in those individual plans as a regional center director, that if the individual is using that piece of equipment, that came with him or her. It was customized for him or her. If there was a special adaptive bed in particular, that was also customized with that, and that transferred with them. So I'm more than happy to talk with you more about examples of a barrier. I don't, like you, see that as a barrier. I think they should go with the individual. The whole idea of this great act had the individual planning involved is funded from a single source, the great state of California and federal participation. So part of that individual plan is what that person would need through the whole rhythm of their life. I know I have personally participated in just what I just described on the individual plan. So I think it is our mission, simple mission, to honor those aspects of what an individual need to have a full, helpful life, including the ability to get from point A to point B, be self-directed in doing that. Okay. And those appliances that we call, and I use the word appliances because they're unique. There's so many great ones out there. They break down. So the continuity of it becomes, as you implied, becomes really significant. The maintenance of it becomes a significant part in that person's life. And the individual plans through the 21 regional centers, as movements are made, should include that. And I know that that is a good plan when it's operationalized. And I'm really confident that it is operationalized.
Thank you. From what you've seen from this budget or the budget analysis that you've seen, do you see the closure of Latterman DC and the transfer of the land to that Cal Poly Pomona?
Another good question. As you know,
So elaborate a little bit more.
Yes.
If it is going to be transferred, are we getting a fee for it? Is any of that revenue that's part of that property value going to be serviced and brought into the community so the people in the community aren't living at a poverty level or below poverty level, like Mr. Anderson stated? Like, what's going to happen to those resources? Are we just giving it away, or is it going to be, are any of these resources going to be funneled back to the community so the community isn't living in a poverty level?
Let me share what I know to be accurate at this point in time. Department of General Services has the responsibility relative to the utilization of those state properties, and including this case, Cal Poly, the agreement there. That's the amount of detail I can supply with you, more detail of what those transactions are as a witness to it. As you know, we are currently, we're the current users of that property, and think of it in that term. That doesn't mean we're irresponsible, but we are the current users. We have staff there as it goes through something called a warm shutdown. At the end of the beginning of July, it will be completely transferred over to the Department of General Services for all the other aspects of its utilization. And that's what I can share at this point.
On you say they're current users. As the current users of all the DC properties, how many units are potentially, or do you anticipate to continually be decertified by the federal government because of its sanitary or status?
Okay. At this point, Sonoma Developmental Center is decertified, if that's what you're asking. Yeah. And so, and then...
do you still have people in those units that the federal government decertified?
When you the decertification has to do with reimbursement and funding.
Right.
And so that makes a burden on the state during that course of it. We're still in process with the federal government relative to it as we speak right now. So, and hopefully we can negotiate with the federal government a transition relative for Sonoma Developmental Center that is in the best interest of Californians, and especially our budget issues.
We backfilled that budget on the last cycle that we had. So we had to backfill that budget because the federal government decertified Sonoma units. I think 12 or 24 units.
Yeah, 12. Yeah.
12 units. So 12 units. And we backfilled that budget, but they decertified it because it didn't meet the standards, living conditions and everything else, where these people, where these consumers are housed. So are there other units that you're in now, the care, custody, and control over, that are going to be decertified that we're going to have to address in this year's session?
At this point in time, we believe the interventions that have taken place relative to the operations of Sonoma will meet standards. That is yet to be tested.